Hi there. Welcome to the Open Canvas Method presentation. My name is Raymond Lutz and I'm going to be your host today covering this new method for handling our elections. Hi, I'd like to just introduce myself very briefly. My background is in electrical and computer science engineering. I worked in the document imaging industry developing printers, scanners, fax copiers, type equipment for about 20 years. I'm a president of Cognisys Incorporated, and I founded the Citizens Oversight Projects, or COPS, in 2006 to help with election integrity and other issues in politics. I'm currently a candidate for the California State Assembly, the 77th District, which is primarily the San Diego East County area. Welcome to the presentation. Now, I promised people I'd get this down to as short as possible, so I have the whole method here briefly on one slide. The Open Canvas method requires durable paper ballots. We digitally photograph every ballot in the election using a secure team, and then we record those onto optical media such as data DVDs. This creates a complete election record which is available for review by various parties. Then competitive teams such as the Democrats, Republicans, Libertarians, oversight groups, etc. They look through these images and recognize the vote by using any software that they'd wish to. The results are compared and every discrepancy is settled. The results are considered the final canvas. It eliminates a central tabulator, continuously self-audits and self-certifies. It's inexpensive, scalable, and can be deployed right away. Before I get into more detail on the Open Canvas method itself, I'd like to back up for a couple of minutes and go over why we're looking at this. First of all, our democracy depends on the integrity of our elective process. Unfortunately, attacks can and have occurred at pretty much every step in the process. For example, promoting the candidates and issues, we have campaign finance problems, basically bribing our candidates when they're generating money. Of course, inaccurate ballot statements that we really can't understand what they mean. Registering voters is another area, and they're dealing with this in terms of purging the voter list, making it hard to register. Collecting the vote is where we're really going to focus in this presentation, and the attacks there include having the lines at the precinct area way too long for people to wait, having horrendous ID requirements, or just misplacing or losing ballots. We've had machine failures, hacking into the machine, sleepovers and so forth to change the vote. Of course, then counting the vote, once we've collected it, they can manipulate who the winner is by one click of the button sometimes. We have problems with announcing votes, early announcements by the media, the time zone differences where the polls are closed and they start announcing the winner in one part of the country while they're still voting in another part. Of course, just bypassing counting and using court decisions like we saw in the 2000 election, that's one way to completely deal with it, is just bypass the vote entirely. Auditing the process is something that needs to be done entirely within this. Unfortunately, one of the main things is to do recounting, and it's very expensive to recount the way they're doing it, and sometimes the registrar voters are very uncooperative. With all those different areas where attacks can occur, certainly the Open Canvas method is not going to insulate us from all the attacks. We're going to be focusing on collecting and counting the vote. If you remember, in the 2000 election, the result of that was the Help America Vote Act, or HAVA, and it required some sort of recording voting equipment, electronic voting equipment that would help people vote correctly. The machine that you see here is a type of machine which is called a DRE, a direct recording equipment, because you vote on a touch screen and your vote is actually recorded internally with no real way to know if it's remembering your vote correctly or not. Originally they had no audit trail, and they were found to be fairly easy to hack with proprietary software developed specifically for elections. Then they added the tape, which you can see the printer attached to this in the front. That was a help, but it's a lousy permanent record. It's hard to process and store it. These machines require a lot more space than the other methods that were being used, and of course you got to plug them in, and they take quite a bit of training, which was difficult in some places. They're subject to availability attacks by providing too few machines in areas of the country where you expect perhaps your opponent to have additional voters there. Of course, they could just lose chips, and of course they have to be certified by some organization to guarantee that they're keeping the vote correctly. The only positives here are that they are supposedly good for the American Disabilities Act requirements in terms of helping the deaf or the blind to vote on their own, and they help the voter avoid error in terms of over or under voting. As a result of the various attacks that are available for these DRE machines, the experts have agreed that durable paper ballots are essential to help us eliminate the in-precinct hacking that we've seen. The nice thing about this type of voting is that no special training is required in the polling place. All you need to use is a pen or pencil to fill out your form, and anybody can do it. These ballots are already available because they're used for vote-by-mail voters today. There's no power needed. They're not subject to any sleepover issues, losing chips or power. And the really important thing is that they serve as a permanent record of the election that can be recounted at any time. The drawback is that it doesn't fulfill the HAVA requirements with regard to disabled voter access and voter error avoidance. The ballot you see here is a ballot designed by Diebold Systems to be used in their precinct scanners in San Diego County. Unfortunately, using precinct scanners are also a source of possible hacking. The precinct scanner that you see here is a Diebold Systems scanner. It is designed to be used in the precinct, and it was used in prior elections. Unfortunately, this firmware in the scanner can be hacked to favor a candidate, so when it scans and counts the ballots, it can be changed. The information, the data, is actually put into an electronic card and then delivered to the central tabulator, where it would be all of the cards would be added up. Each one had to be certified by the Secretary of State. They're subject to the sleepovers, lost chips, and power outages of the other systems. Polling ran much more smoothly, though, because ballots could be completed easily, and you didn't need the many DRE machines which required power and could all go down and so forth. This was only one scanner that, if it went down, people could still continue to vote. The nice thing is the paper ballots still allow full recounts. So in San Diego County, to avoid those sleepover problems and possible chip or power loss, they gathered all these precinct scanners together and operated them en masse inside the office of the Registrar of Voters. You can see in this picture here they had approximately 100 volunteers feeding precinct scanners the ballots one by one. The precinct scanners did not have automatic feed capability, and they fed ballots at approximately 6 ballots per minute. They're still subject to firmware hacking, and then of course the election results can still be modified in the central tabulator, which, by the way, is a problem with virtually every other method other than the open canvas method. Doesn't have the central tabulator problem. Now, one solution to this that's been promoted by a lot of the election integrity activists is the use of hand counting of ballots in the precinct. Unfortunately, this makes a false assumption that we believe that precinct workers are automatically trustable. Precinct workers may want to slant the election. Indeed, the idea that perhaps only a few of the precincts will be like that, and so therefore it's not going to hurt the election too much, is probably valid. But nevertheless, it's quite difficult for long ballots in large precincts. The longer the ballot is and the more voters you have, the harder or the longer it takes. It's subject to central tabulator hacks still, where you bring the votes in, and when they're doing the final compilation of the election, it can possibly be changed at that point. The cost is about 7 cents per race per ballot, according to the New Hampshire study. Therefore, we don't believe this is the ultimate solution to our election integrity problems. Now, I keep talking about the central tabulator, and it turns out that regardless of the vote collection and counting method, the vote is eventually collected in something called the central tabulator, which in this picture is, I've been told, the beige box behind the worker, or I guess basically where he's looking at it almost through a screen. Entire races can be modified at this point with almost no opportunity to catch it. These central tabulators are basically just computers. They require certification, and you need trusted workers to operate the tabulators. The 1% tally methodology was reviewed by cops at San Diego County. We found it to be inadequate to catch corrupt workers. Well, it doesn't seem like a very bright picture, I agree. But the open canvas method, I think, will show you how this can be fixed in such a way that we can be sure that these hacks do not occur. The next couple of few slides, I'm going to illustrate a possible implementation of the open canvas method using every step of the process. There are several variations on the theme that are possible to this process. I'm going to talk about some of those later, but as long as the intent of the system is preserved, there are still other variations, I'm sure, that could be applied to it. So the first step in the process of the open canvas method, as I said, it requires durable paper ballots, and this phase 1 is the voting step. It's very typical that the voter signs in at the precinct. A ballot is issued by the precinct workers using their normal process. If it's vote by mail, the ballot is mailed to the voter. The voter completes a ballot by darkening bubbles on the paper ballot using ink, preferably. The voter then deposits the ballot in the slot on the ballot box. Now, we prefer that the voter do the deposition of their own ballot into the ballot box. In vote by mail, the voter returns their ballot by mail, or they can deliver it at a drop box. Drop boxes should be made available such that if the voter does not trust the mail and vote by mail, then they can use a drop box, which would give them that trust. Precinct workers don't handle or count the ballots. They maintain paper records of the number of ballots issued and deposited in their box. And this should all match when it comes into the receiving inspection, which we'll cover in the next step. Now, at the end of the day, at the precinct, they close up shop, and now they're doing quite a bit of counting on their own and handling of the ballots, and we'd like to not have that done at all. The vote by mail envelope should be deposited into the ballot box as well, maybe in a separate compartment, and all these are included on the log sheet, which are deposited as well into the ballot box. Then tape is probably applied over the slots, and the ballot boxes are typically a corrugated cardboard box rather than the type of locked box that you see here. The sealed boxes are transported to collection centers distributed around the county, and then at those collection centers loaded into vans and taken to the central election office. In San Diego County, it's the Registrar Voters Office. Now, the first step at the Registrar Voter's Office, the sealed ballots boxes are processed through a receiving inspection area. The completed ballots are separated from log sheets and from the vote by mail envelopes. The vote by mail envelopes are validated using a normal process, which we're not going to cover in this video. But basically, at this point, we're checking the accuracy and the processing that was done in the precinct to make sure everything looks fine. And then we may optionally group the ballots into precincts, which is probably a good idea, but it isn't absolutely required. And the reason is because each one of these ballots needs to have the precinct number on it, so we know, and what kind of ballot it is, so we know where the bubbles are on the ballot, which needs to be counted. Now, so far, pretty much what you've seen is as it's done today, and in fact, there may be other types of counting that are already in process that may want to be handled at this point before we go into this phase 2. So it's that in San Diego they would be doing those precinct scanners, as I showed you before, where there's 100 set up in the room. They would still do their scanning that way and come up with their own result. However, after they're done with that, or preferably, as we get more experience with this, we create an election record by essentially photographing all of the ballots using digital photographs, and that's done using conventional document imaging equipment. What we do is we create full images of each ballot, and we store each onto a separate file with a separate unique sequence number. There's a couple of examples of equipment that you see here, and by no means do I imply that this is the only equipment or even the best equipment. But you see at the top is a Bell and Howell example, a high-duty cycle scanner. It scans at 140 pages per minute, scanning both sides of the page, and with a 200 dpi resolution, 200 dots per inch. It has a 500 sheet input capacity, so we can put 500 ballots in at a time. The one below that is a Kodak with 120 pages per minute, also scanning both sides with a 1,000 sheet input tray. So these are very, very fast, and they don't require a great deal of operation. You don't have to feed every single ballot like they're doing today in San Diego County, for example. Now, one of the important things about the scanning process is that the team that does this does not attempt to tally any votes. They don't count anything. The only thing they're responsible for is to create accurate images of the ballots. They need to occasionally sample the images to make sure that they're actually matching the ballots that are going through. The ballots, as I mentioned, should have the precinct encoding on them, which is the case today, so that we can tell which precinct they're from, and we don't need to be inputting anything into the system. The image itself should be sufficient to tell us what type of ballot we're looking at. The picture you see there is not actually a scanning process, but to give you an idea of what it might look like. Now, I want to mention that this type of scanning, that is basically photographing documents, is standard industry practice today. High-end scanners are used extensively by corporate document management departments, and this is nothing unusual. You have a company such as an insurance company will take all of its insurance claim forms and scan them immediately when they're coming into their company, and then immediately shred the documents to maintain their customers' privacy. In this case, we're not going to be shredding any ballots, but the point here is that these are not custom designed for elections. This is equipment that you can buy off the shelf today that's already been designed for use in industry. They're available from numerous suppliers, and you don't need a huge expensive contract with elections only companies to buy these. In fact, they may be leased or rented because they're available very, very easily. An important point here is it does not matter if they are proprietary or use software or firmware within them which is proprietary to the company. In fact, we expect that to be the case. The California Secretary of State has said that these machines do not need certification because they're not counting anything. The only thing that they're doing is creating an image of the document. Now, when these ballots are scanned, the output of the process is files, each file basically being an image, as I said, a JPEG type file, which you're familiar with these on the internet. You see them all the time. Probably 200 dots per inch, or resolution, probably imaged with just black and white only, like a fax. And then those are stored onto optical media, such as a DVD disc. Example, if you had 1.5 million ballots, which is the number that we expect in San Diego County, this would require about 150 gigabytes of storage space. As you know, you can go out and buy a 500 gigabyte hard disk, which is about the cheapest disk that you can buy now on a dollar per byte basis. So storing 150 gigabytes is no black magic. For standard DVD data disks, it would take about 32 such disks to store the entire election. I understand one Blu-ray data DVD would have the capacity to hold all the images for all the 1.5 million images from San Diego County. So this is a result of the election, is this permanent record. And by the way, this record is more robust than the actual ballots, which can be modified much more easily than the images in this type of a record. Now, the next step in the process is to actually recognize the vote. That is, take the images and decide what did the voter intend by their marks on the ballot. These DVDs, election record, is made available to major parties and oversight groups, anyone really who wants to purchase it for a nominal fee. Then the team separately and redundantly review the ballot data and reduce it to a tally. It's preferred that at least 3 teams exist, so you can have the registrar of voters and at least the 2 major parties should be involved in counting their own ballots, and is recognizing the vote on the ballots. They can use any standard or proprietary software or other means, including manually inspecting the ballots. I can imagine a firm such as Google or something hosting these on the internet and allowing the public to look through every last one. Off-the-shelf software exists to capture such marks from forms in general, and they're very easy to use, and they start at perhaps around $400. And I'm sure you could spend a lot more, but I don't think that you can spend much more than a few $1,000s on such software packages that do just as much as a low-cost package. You use these on computer systems, and you can mark out where to look for the marks, and where significant marks, landmarks on the ballot, so that they can get them aligned, and so they know that they're on the right side. Then the vote is recognized, and we're going to show you in a second how you might need to look at those ballot markings. Here we have a couple of examples so you can kind of get an idea of what we would be looking at. We have ballots, again, which are assigned a sequence number. Each ballot gets a unique yet arbitrary sequence number. And I'd pick such sequence numbers here and mark them at the top of each of the, and this is just one race. This was from the September 5th. It's a Democratic race, and you can see in the first example somebody put an X there through the circle and next to the Biden, Joe Biden, and so we should get the result of that's a vote for Biden. And the next one, you can see an appropriately darkened circle for Edwards. The next one, a little tiny dot for Obama. And the first one on the lower row, we see somebody who marked 4 different ones, so over voting. One here which is for Clinton with a big X, and then one with example which is blank. So this is perhaps a range of what we might see all of which would be appropriately captured by the recognition phase. Now, as a result of the recognition phase, each team produces a simple data file, and I've shown an example, a segment of the ones that we just looked at here. You see in the first column is the ballot number, and then there's columns for each one of the races. In this case, Biden, Clinton, Dodd, Edwards. It's each one of the little bubbles that you could possibly fill in on the ballot would get either a 1 or a 0. 1, the bubble is filled in, or 0, it isn't filled in. Also, there is a hash number, which we'll cover a bit more later, but it's a unique number which is generated from the image file itself. Each record is exactly the vote as cast by the voter, and nothing is excluded. So you want to put down just exactly which bubbles were filled in or not filled in, and that's all. Each team, as I said, produces this hash signature of the image, and the election officials create their own signature from the image files, but they don't supply those with the images. And this allows you to check to see if the images are tampered with. Even if the ballots look identical, they will generate a different hash code, most likely. Very, very rarely do you end up with the same number, even if the image looks identical. Now, once the teams complete their files, the data files, that is, they capture the vote off of every single ballot, the data files are compared from each team. So you take the file from the Democrats, Republicans, and any oversight groups or other parties, and you compare these. And this is a very simple process for a computer to do. We expect that some records will differ, and this is actually because we have the different parties and the different teams preferably using a different approach. That is, they should use a different software package, either from their own making or for some proprietary source, and that's fine. When it comes in, we compare those, and the simple way to handle it is that the majority rules. If you have 3 or more, you take the ones that two parties agree with, and the other one is probably wrong. But the differences can be reviewed by the public, and the idea is that every single ballot should be agreed to. There is no ballots that are just left to chance here. Every single one, either all the parties of the election agree to it or not. I'm going to go over some of the points as to why this is such a good idea. First of all, this eliminates the need for certifying software. The idea of proprietary software, that it has to be open source and looked over by everyone, completely becomes a non-issue. We don't care if proprietary software is used. We don't care if the software is certified. It doesn't matter for this system. We are not relying upon expensive hand counts. In other words, hand counting is still available, but it's actually quite easy to look at the images as long as we can verify that the chain of custody is reliable from the actual ballots to the images on the screen. There is no central tabulator black box. The reason is because everybody agrees to what the result is for every single ballot. We don't rely upon any trusted election workers, and as we do this, the error rate, that is the differences between the different methods, will fall over time as they become improved and start to agree more about what is allowed in terms of the type of marking. This essentially sets up an audit which is constantly done, because the competitive teams are going to be generating a constant audit. It's easy to deploy in parallel with existing methods. We can deploy this right away. It doesn't have to replace the system that's used now, although it can over time. The cost is low because it's scalable. That is, it doesn't cost incremental more if you add one more race to the ballot. It doesn't add more if you add more ballots because we're using automated equipment. This makes the cost go down. It leverages information technology, as I just mentioned, to eliminate vulnerabilities and so that we can complete the count quickly. There's no need to be completely afraid of high technology equipment as long as it's deployed correctly, and so that we can have automatic checks and balances in the system that will be checking each other as we do the vote. In some ways, this is a lot like our tripartite system that we have in our government. We need at least 3 different branches of government to check each other, and in this case we prefer to have 3 different groups processing the ballots at the same time. Now, this system still relies upon a chain of custody that has to be reliable, and we need to make sure that this chain of custody issue is dealt with regardless of whether we use the open canvas method or not. The chain of custody is important both on the ballots before they're imaged and on the images after they've been scanned. Now, the chain of custody can be improved by imprinting a sequence number on the ballots themselves. However, this may have some initial foot dragging on this because it's a little bit new for people to consider that maybe we're going to be adding something to the ballots. But I assure you there's no real danger here because these modern scanners have the ability to imprint on the original ballot a sequence number such that the number appears in the image file and remains on the ballot permanently. This makes it very difficult to add images to the system by corrupt workers by electronically stuffing the ballot box. Then another good thing is it allows the original ballot to be inspected. If there's any questions about the image file, we can go back to that original ballot. So putting the sequence number on the ballot is an important step to improving the chain of custody. Even without that, though, when the ballots come in, we need to make sure they don't get lost or misplaced or added to or shuffled with other ballots within the registrar of voters' office. And we need to make sure that the images don't get lost before they're actually cast into this form on the optical media. Now, earlier I mentioned the ballot signature. This is basically a number which is created from each image file, and it's generated using an algorithm which is well known. Now, with these types of signatures, it's really quite unlikely that 2 ballots will create the same exact signature, even if they look the same to a human being. And even if you scan the same ballot twice in the same scanner, you're likely to get an image which is not going to create the same signature. It's also very difficult to modify a ballot and keep this and get back to the same signature that it had before. So they're kind of a check that the image has not been modified. The registrar of voters would generate a signature when they first generate the election record and keep that on hand to make sure that that any parties that generate data, they must generate a signature which then must match the original, so we know that there hasn't been any changing of the images. These signatures are standard practice in computer technology industry, and they actually may be good for a voter receipt in the future, but I'm not ready to make a proposal on that right now. Turns out that this system is really attractive because it can be deployed immediately in parallel with existing processing methods. Of course, we're going to need paper ballots, as I said, and so this is something that we really need to push on. If the counties are not using paper ballots, we need to make sure that they transition to paper ballots as soon as possible. This has been reviewed by the Secretary of State of California, and their office there says it does not need to be certified because there's no counting involved in the scanning process, and counting is done by the public. It does require the purchase or rental lease of scanner equipment. The high-speed scanners that I mentioned run somewhere between $10,000 to $50,000 to purchase, and I'm not really giving you a quote here because I think that's really not my field, but I do know that that is the price range we're looking at. We're not talking about millions of dollars, which is what they've spent in the past on other equipment. The imprinting options should be purchased when they purchase these up front, such that when we do get the authorization to do the sequence number imprinting, then it can be added without any additional cost. The competitive teams must purchase or write their own recognition software. That off-the-shelf software runs around $400 and up. Very easy to use, and I'm sure that once this type of system is deployed, there'll be plenty of solutions that encapsulate the whole thing into one, helping those groups to do their own counting. Before I complete the presentation, I want to mention a couple of variations on the theme here. I'm sure that there are more, but there are a couple that I should mention. First of all, in capturing the vote, it's possible to use direct recording election equipment to capture the vote from the user, and that way providing disability compliance and voter error suppression. And after that, a durable paper ballot would be printed, inspected by the voter, and then processed as usual. Now, I believe that there are some election groups that are proposing this system. However, in our opinion, we're not recommending it as it requires a vast amount of training at the precinct, and of course is also quite expensive. The DRE equipment is quite expensive. Secondly, you could use existing in-precinct scanners, such as the ones I showed earlier, to provide immediate unofficial results with the open canvas scanning and a competitive canvas to occur to create the final result. So you can, because of the robust nature of the open canvas competitive scanning process, the competitive recognition process, we don't need to worry about sleepovers and other issues in the in-precinct scanners, because that is only an election night sort of advisory and not the final vote. Those in-precinct scanners could also be used to provide feedback to the user in terms of voter error, to allow them to correct it and then suppress this type of voter error that which is one of the goals of the HAVA Act. Those last two things do not provide the disability voter assistance as does the DRE equipment. Finally, I'd like to conclude with a couple of points. This open canvas method seems to be a very viable option. It is the only approach reviewed by COPS that provides a robust hacker immunity. It doesn't care about proprietary software or the central tabulator. This is one approach that doesn't, when I hear talk about open source and other approaches, this approach doesn't care about that. The central tabulator issue is one that affects even hand counting in the precincts, and it doesn't care about that either. We'd appreciate it if you'd spread the word about this approach, send it to your friends. We'd appreciate feedback, more information. My name again is Raymond Lutz, and I'm with Citizens Oversight Projects, or COPS, at citizensoversight.org. Please sign up at our website and get on our mailing list. Thank you.